So this is part 2 of the revision notes for chapter 1, and in this video we'll be focusing on these 4 sections of the chapter. Chapter 4.1 stakeholders, 1.5 external environment. This is specifically looking at impacts of the external environment on business decisions, in particular the steeple analysis. 1.6 growth and evolution, things like franchising versus mergers and acquisitions, joint partnerships, strategic alliances, etc. And then 1.7, which is organisational planning tools, which is the higher level section of the chapter. So to start with stakeholders. There are both internal and external stakeholders to businesses. And it's important to note that there is a difference between being a shareholder and being a stakeholder. A shareholder is one group of stakeholders. A shareholder is somebody who owns a share in a company. A stakeholder is somebody who has some kind of an interest in how the business operates. So they are interested in how the business performs, in business's policies, in the business's behaviour. So our internal stakeholders here, employees, managers, directors, shareholders, and our external stakeholder groups, customers, suppliers, pressure groups. These are like campaigning groups who may be campaigning for things like environmental awareness or global warming, preventing testing of cosmetics on animals, that kind of thing. So pressure groups are these sort of campaign groups that push for political and social change. Competitors in the market, the government who we pay our taxes to. All of these are external stakeholders. Now, the stakeholder section is very important in business management, especially in the 20-mark concept essay. 4 of those marks in the 20-mark concept essay are awarded for your ability to consider the perspectives of different individuals and societies, and that refers specifically to the stakeholders of the business. So how does the customer feel about this policy or procedure, what you're discussing? Or how would shareholders feel? How would competitors feel? How does it impact the employees? It's also important to note that when we have different stakeholders, it's very difficult to produce policies and procedures that keeps everybody happy at the same time. And so conflict arises. Conflict arises because businesses can't simultaneously meet the needs of all of their stakeholders. So it's regular and it's common that businesses have to weigh up the needs of different stakeholders and decide which stakeholders are most important at a particular moment in time. And depending upon the decision to be made, that will change depending upon the business it is. So, for example, if shareholders want more profit, this could come about by cutting staff benefits. So, where shareholders may be happy, employees are likely to be unhappy. So these are our different stakeholders. Talking about the external environment and how the external environment impacts business operations, we have a steeple analysis, and steeple stands for social, technological, economic, environmental, political, legal, and ethical. These factors, and we're going to have a discussion about what these factors actually mean, affect businesses but are beyond the control of the business. So these are all external factors that are providing both risks and opportunities for businesses. So sometimes one of these factors is providing an opportunity, something that the business can take advantage of, and sometimes it's providing a threat, something that the business has to try and avoid. So one of the common economic factors is when we see the economy downturn, otherwise known as a recession. A recession obviously is going to have an impact on the availability of disposable income for the potential customer, and so that's potentially going to have an impact on the sales revenue generated by a business. Now, this is outside of the control of the organisation, but the organisation has to try and achieve strategies in order to try and avoid this. We can see this the busy high street here with roadworks going on. Roadworks like this, something very simple, can have a significant impact on businesses because during the time of this roadwork, obviously they're passing trade, the vehicles that would normally be coming up and down this high street aren't able to do so. And so we have environmental change about the surrounding environment of the business. That's going to impact how they operate, but it's outside of their control. Political or social unrest, protesting about a particular issue or a particular decision is going to have an impact on certain businesses and how businesses are allowed to operate. So we have lots of different things that come up. Social could be to do with a societal change in opinion. We could argue that today, more so than 50 years ago, people are concerned about chemicals and e-numbers in food. People want to know what they're eating. We could also say that today, more than 50 years ago, people are more concerned with how their behaviour impacts the environment. These are social changes, and those social changes have impacted consumer habits. Technological change, this could be the availability of new technologies that we can take advantage of. It could also be technological problems. So companies that suffer from tech issues, internet downtime, network servers failure, etc. Those are going to be factors outside of the control of the business that are going to impact how they behave. I mentioned about economic recessions, but also economic improvements are going to have an improvement in customers' affordability to purchase products and items. Environmental factors could be things like, for example, if you're running a company or if you work within a company that relies upon a primary raw material like a plant stock or animal stock or something that is grown in that sense. Like if you work for a coffee company like Starbucks, they source their coffee beans from fair trade farms in Costa Rica and other places. Now, if there was to be damage to the coffee crop, if there was to be a shortage of coffee beans produced, that is going to be an environmental factor that is going to impact on that business because obviously the cost of coffee would increase. Political factors, as I mentioned, things like protests and so on and so forth, but also changes in politics, and when you've got things going on like the trade war that Trump is currently pursuing between America and China, that's going to have an impact on how businesses operate, and yet it's outside of their control. Legal issues. It could be perhaps going through the process of somebody suing the company, or it could be the business taking advantage of a legal loophole to be able to achieve something, and ethical issues. Ethical and social have a lot of ties. There's an awful lot to do with social factors that come under the ethical factors impacting a business. Because obviously our ethics are based upon societal norms. So there's a lot of crossover here. You'll find that when you produce a steeple analysis, those of you who did one for your IA, you don't have to complete every section of the steeple analysis because quite often there isn't always factors that apply to all 7 sections. So people will often do a shortened version of a steeple analysis, which is sometimes called a PEST analysis, just focusing on, for example, political, economic, social and technological. But that can change as well, depending upon which headings you use. So this is looking at how the external environment impacts business organisations. Talking about growth and evolution, we have to consider the advantages of growing. And one of the advantages of growing is that businesses are striving to achieve what we call economies of scale. Okay, so economies of scale, by definition from our textbook, are the lower average costs of production that a firm can benefit from as it operates on a larger scale due to an improvement in productivity efficiency. So that literally means as a business gets bigger, the average costs of production should get smaller. And the most common example of this is purchasing economies of scale. This means if I buy more, I can reduce my unit cost, buying in bulk and achieving a discount from it. That's the most common example of economies of scale, would be purchasing economies of scale. But it's not the only one. Bigger businesses will benefit from financial economies of scale, which means that they do not pay anywhere near as higher interest on bank loans as small businesses do, because they have a proven track record of being financially secure. So actually taking out loans is cheaper per pound or per dollar that is borrowed. Technological economies of scale. This occurs when businesses grow larger and tend to replace human beings with technological improvements. This might be machinery or robotics on a production line. It could be software for communications, or software for managing human resources and payroll and things like that. But technological economies of scale refers to, as a company gets bigger, we can become more efficient by getting machinery to do part of the jobs that human beings otherwise would have done. Specialism and managerial economies of scale refers to how larger companies will be able to employ people who specialise in a particular skill set area. Whereas if you imagine a sole trader who doesn't employ anyone, he at this moment in time is fulfilling the role of the accountant and the marketer and production and sales and all of these different things. Well, he's not going to be expert in all of those roles, so he will make mistakes and he will be less efficient in the output for each role. Each task may take him longer than it would take a specialist to complete those tasks. Whereas as we get bigger, we can divide those tasks into their specialist functions. And although that's obviously going to cost us an additional wage for each additional person, when we divide the productivity between those different people, they're more productive per unit or per task than one person trying to do all of the jobs would be. Marketing economies of scale. So big businesses, especially big conglomerates like Coca-Cola. Coca-Cola benefits from marketing economies of scale because it doesn't have to market all of its products separately. One advert for Coca-Cola simultaneously advertises all of Coca-Cola's Coca-Cola products. The same could be said for Apple. A careful placement of the Apple logo is an advert for iPads and iPhones and MacBooks and all of the different Apple products at the same time. So you're benefiting from a reduced average cost per unit output, per unit sold of marketing. And lastly, the risk-bearing economies of scale. Risk-bearing economies of scale literally means as a business gets bigger, it does more. It sells more, maybe it has a greater range of products that it sells. This meaning that it is spreading the risk of operating. So if one product fails, or if there's bad reviews on one particular output, it's not going to break the company because the company has multiple products and multiple outputs which are, all simultaneously successful. So this is one of the reasons for growth, in order for businesses to benefit from economies of scale. But there is the downside, and this is the idea that sometimes businesses can become too large or too large too quickly and suffer from diseconomies of scale. So diseconomies of scale are the reverse, and this is the result of higher unit costs as a firm continues to increase in size. So the business becomes outsized and inefficient, so average costs begin to rise. So if we think about diseconomies of scale, there are four main sections of this: communication, coordination, bureaucracy, and complacency. So communication diseconomies of scale, for example, the larger a business, the larger a company, the more people in between the CEO and the person on the ground doing the job. And that means that an instruction that is given from a senior manager may not make it to the ground level employee in the same way it was communicated in the first place. You imagine sort of Chinese whispers in business where the CEO has expressed something to one of his senior managers, and that's been expressed to one of the department leaders, and the department leader's spoken to the supervisor, and by the time the supervisor actually speaks to the employee, the message isn't quite what it started out to be. So we start to see a lack of efficiency. The business is getting larger and so becoming less efficient. And this is one of the problems of big business. Coordination is similar to communication, but in the sense of getting people to do what they need to do when they need to do it. So this could be again about passing messages on, but it could be about arranging a meeting time for everybody to get together. But because we have 20 people that we need to get around the table for this meeting, because we're a large business, and all of those people have their own schedules and their own roles within the company, it's going to be very difficult to coordinate that. Whereas a small business that maybe has just 2 or 3 people to get around the table to make these final decisions probably finds that a lot easier and probably isn't going to be as inefficient in making it happen. Bureaucracy, which literally means paperwork. The bigger a business, the more paperwork we tend to use, the more sort of policies and procedures. Those can be time consuming and delay decision making. And complacency. Complacency meaning becoming overconfident. The larger a business gets, there may be an attitude associated with these with big business of we've achieved it, we've won, we've got there, we've arrived. And does that make big businesses more likely to sort of sit back and not continue driving, not continue pushing for the best, and therefore become inefficient in their complacency, in their sort of overconfidence of their role? I don't think it's the case for all businesses, but what you have to bear in mind is that these elements, diseconomies of scale, are very much about the culture of a company. They can be avoided, diseconomies of scale. They can be avoided with better communication, with defined roles and a strong organisational hierarchy that clearly defines how information is communicated and gives people the opportunity to ask questions and come back and check and things. So they can be avoided, but they are a significant risk for large businesses. So when we think about different types of growth, we have to be aware that we have internal and external growth. Internal growth, which is known as organic growth, this is going to be looked at a little bit more in the videos on chapter 4, because this literally relies upon the marketing process. So growing by price, product, place and promotion. Growing by doing what we currently do better. Changing pricing strategies, developing new products, selling it in new locations through new distribution channels, changing how we promote our product. This is a slow process of growth, but it's natural and organic, meaning that businesses have the chance to step into these the growth, shall we say, to the new growth areas without a sort of resistance to change that can come from very fast growth. You're going to find more culture clashes in a fast growth as well. And fast growth is also known as external or inorganic growth, comes from the following 4 areas: mergers and acquisitions, joint ventures, strategic alliances, and franchising. So if we start with mergers and acquisitions, okay, well, a merger and acquisition slightly different in the sense that an acquisition is when a company buys out another company and that company gets absorbed into the original organisation. Whereas mergers are when 2 organisations agree to join for the mutual benefit of both. So, for example, an acquisition. Kraft bought Cadbury. They bought the company, and now the company just exists as a brand underneath the Kraft label. When they did this, Cadbury did not want to be bought out. However, as a publicly limited company that trades on the stock market, Kraft were in a position to convince enough of a percentage of Cadbury shareholders to sell their shares by offering them above market value, to the point where Kraft owned a majority stake in Cadbury. And at that point, the Cadbury label became a brand under Kraft's name. Then, in the last couple of years, we've had the Kraft-Heinz merger. So this instance, was not an acquisition. One was not bought by the other, but both companies agreed to join together for mutual benefit, for a shared level of power and success and benefit that comes from this. So mergers and acquisitions. It's important to note that in both cases, the other company no longer exists. Cadbury does not exist as a company anymore. It is simply a brand under Kraft. Kraft and Heinz do not exist separately anymore. They exist as Kraft-Heinz. Then we have joint ventures and strategic alliances, which are very similar. A joint venture, this example here, Sony Ericsson was a joint venture. They produced mobile phones in the 90s. Sony, that most of you are familiar with, an electronics company, a Japanese electronics company, worked with Ericsson. Ericsson are a Scandinavian sound system company. They produce speakers and headphones and things like that, sound output. And basically, Sony and Ericsson decided to come together to work on a joint venture, a joint project of producing mobile phones that were known for having very good sound quality for listening to music on. So this joint venture, Sony still exists as its own company, Ericsson still exists as its own company, but they also have Sony Ericsson, which exists as a separate third company. And that separate third company has its own sort of business operating rights and makes profit in its own way. Whereas then we have strategic alliances. And strategic alliances are a little bit more flexible, whereby companies sort of agree to share resources or to share tasks for a mutual benefit. One of the common examples of strategic alliances is in airlines. Star Alliance is an alliance of various airlines who agree to essentially share planes. If you are booked on a flight from Nice to Amsterdam, you may be booked on KLM, Dutch Airlines, and on the same day, there's another flight within at a similar time, going from the same location, but it's with Air France, and both of these flights are half full. Is it financially viable for both companies to fly both of their planes with a half capacity of customers? No. So this alliance means that we can agree, we can share, whereby, if necessary, we'll put all of those customers just onto one plane, and we'll both share the costs of that plane, the fuel, the taxes, the insurance, etc. And this allows a flexibility of businesses to apply resources where valued, where necessary. And then we have franchising. So McDonald's is a classic example of franchising. It's not the only one. Fast food chains just happen to be a good example for the franchising model. Franchising is where a franchisee and a franchisor share a job responsibility. So the franchisor is the mother company. So if we think about sort of corporate McDonald's, okay, they own the McDonald's brand, the McDonald's label. They sell the right to trade under that label to franchisees. So when you buy a franchise, when you pay a franchise fee, you're buying the right to trade under their name. You're buying the right to use their logo, their menu, their colour scheme, to produce their food. And in order to do that, so you pay first off a franchise fee, which gives you the right to trade, and then you pay royalties, which is a monthly payment back to corporate McDonald's, and that monthly payment is based upon a percentage of your earnings. And even if you make a loss, you have to still pay royalties back to corporate McDonald's. So why would McDonald's sell the right to trade under their name? Well, basically it enables them to grow very quickly, and to grow into locations where they may not have the local knowledge necessary to make a success of that business venture. So that's one of the main reasons why corporate McDonald's will go through the franchising option. Why do franchisees buy into this rather than just opening their own restaurant? Well, there's a lot more success to be had when you're opening an already proven business model. You know this business model works because it works elsewhere. You don't have to create a brand image and a brand awareness and customer awareness of this product. People already know what it is. People already are familiar with it. You know, this is almost a guaranteed successful business if you have the money to put up for the franchising costs in the first place. But it's a business model that you know is a guaranteed winner. So various reasons why. Franchisors have to be very careful because obviously the reputation of the brand is at stake if the franchisee operates the business badly. The customer doesn't see it as being run by, Joe Bloggs from wherever. The customer just sees it as McDonald's. So the customer sees the logo and the brand and doesn't associate that this is not being run by that corporation. So that is definitely a risk when it comes to franchising. From the franchisee's perspective, you don't have an awful lot of control. You have to follow the what is set out in the contract of the franchise very carefully. You haven't got control over what you put on your menu, and you don't have control over your suppliers, and to a certain extent you don't have control over your pricing strategies and things. You have to follow the model that is laid out. So this is different types of internal and external growth. So now we go on to the last section of chapter 1, which is organisational planning tools, of which there are 3. These are all high level only. And we start with Ishikawa's fishbone diagram. So the fishbone diagram, named because it looks like a fishbone, is a tool that is supposed to help businesses identify the root cause of problems. So what you do is you have the triangle on the right with the problem or issue labelled. And then feeding into this, you categorise the potential causes of that problem. Now, one of the things you have to remember here is you don't put symptoms of the problem, you put the causes of the problem. So, for example, a symptom of having demotivated staff might be that they constantly leave work early and we've got a high staff turnover. That is a symptom. That's what we get because of this. It's not a cause, okay? So you're thinking about the causes. What would the staff say are causes of their demotivation? And you have to categorise these, and you can categorise them in various ways. Some examples are under management, manpower, materials and machines. Those can all be causes to problems. Or this example here, policies, people, procedures and paraphernalia, which is another word for equipment. And we can see how these headings would contribute towards this particular problem. And then what businesses would do is after they've produced the fishbone diagram with feedback from all stakeholders involved, they would then identify which of these causes can they impact on, which of these causes can they actually make a change towards, which of these causes can they push to see something different. And you list your solutions based upon the causes identified in the first place. So if people lack training, then perhaps the solution for this is to assign more money to the training budget, to the professional development budget, and ensure that staff are appropriately trained for their role. This is a solution that can be added to an action plan for a business based upon the fishbone diagram that's identified that is a cause of the demotivated staff. So the fishbone diagram, very simple tool used to analyse the root cause of problems in business. Then we have decision trees. Decision trees, it's important to note that you always have to put your calculations to the side. It's also important to note that you should have a key that says the square is the decision to be taken, the circle is the probability node, and the double line is the decision not taken. So in this example here, the decision whether to sell the property this year or sell the property next year, if we sell the property this year, there's no cost involved that we can see, but it would come at a value of 492,000. There's also no probability involved, it's just a guarantee. This will happen if we sell the property this year. Whereas if we go for option B, which is to sell the property next year, there are three possible outcomes. First of all, the property prices might rise, that's a 70% chance. Property prices could remain unchanged, that's a 20% chance. And property prices might fall, and that's a 10% chance. So in this case, there is a $540,000 outcome if property prices rise, and we have 70% likelihood of that. So I say 540 multiplied by 0.7 plus 492,000, which is the same as what we would get if we were to sell the property this year. Well, there's only 20% likelihood of that happening, so we times that by 0.2. And we add that to the value that what would occur if property prices fall, which is a 10% likelihood. So 450,000 times by 0.1 gives me a total of 521,400 for these three values. So that number there would go underneath node B. And in this case, because there was only two decisions, the one that has a higher value is the second option, to sell the property next year. So we would discount the first option. Now, if you're going to do a decision tree in your exam, don't put the potential value of the business underneath the line here. Just put it to the side of the line and put your calculations completely separate, because although this is an example from the textbook, you should put costs underneath the line in brackets, and that's the appropriate layout. So just ensure that your value of the potential outcome goes to the side of the line rather than underneath. This is decision trees. And then our third decision-making tool is force field analysis. So force field analysis looks at the driving forces pushing for change to happen and the restraining forces preventing change from happening. So in business, there's all the time there are new changes that are being brought to businesses. Maybe because of external factors in our steeple analysis, maybe that's forcing change. Whatever it might be, there are changes that are forced. And in this example here, we can see what are the forces driving change. What are the reasons for change? When you list your reasons for change, you have to give them a weighting. And that weighting is between 1 and 5, depending upon how strong that force is. And again, restraining forces, you would list them and you would weight them 1 to 5. And these are the forces that are resisting the change. So in this case, introducing new technology, one of the reasons to do this is because it will reduce staffing, which is obviously going to reduce costs, and that's a weighting of a 3. But it's also going to have very high equipment costs. So this is a restraining force, and this is also worth a 3. And what you would do as a business is you would total up the forces and you would give them a value. In this case, if the business wants the change to take place, the restraining forces are currently higher in value than the driving forces. So this would suggest that actually the change will not be particularly successful. So what the business would have to do was have to look at some strategies to make the driving forces stronger or to reduce the impact of some of these restraining forces in order to have the change actually occur. So, for example, the business could plan that staff redundancy should take place over a 3-year period with consultation between unions and wherever possible, keeping staff on and retraining them to manage the new machines and this kind of stuff in order to sort of reduce the weighting of this particular restraining force. So that's the next step of force field analysis, where businesses actually try to see how to achieve the change by improving or strengthening their driving forces or reducing their restraining forces. And so the last decision-making tool that we have is the Gantt chart. And Gantt chart, you will have all made one of these for your IA. And a Gantt chart itemizes when tasks can be completed and which tasks can be completed at the same time. So you have two headings here. You've got your sort of time. This might be in weeks or in months or date or whichever else. And then you have the different actual roles to be completed. And then the blocked colour itemizes how long that role will take. And then, for example, in this case, the production of the walls can only actually take place after the foundation has been laid, as the roof can only happen after the walls have been built. However, both the plumbing and the electric can be done simultaneously at the same time. So a Gantt chart shows the amount of duration of time needed, and it also shows which tasks can be done at the same time as one another. So these are our decision-making tools, and that is the end of the Chapter 1 summary. So the next video coming up will be Chapter 2 summary.